Stop begging for money. It's embarrassing. At the Thanksgiving table, my sister's voice rang out clearer than the sound of clinking glasses. Was I the one in the wrong? Before I could even ask myself that question, 24 pairs of eyes dropped to my plate. No one denied it. Mom straightened her napkin. Dad was just waiting for the right moment to change the subject. I had walked into this house carrying a homemade pumpkin pie to fulfill my role, as always. Stable job. Precise with numbers. The convenient daughter. My sister arrived late and dominated the room like a magazine cutout. I kept my fork suspended over my plate. Only the inside of my chest grew cold. My phone buzzed faintly in my pocket. For just a moment, I saw a note on my screen. Records remain, even when the voices shift. I didn't understand what it meant yet, but I felt like something remained in this room. On Thanksgiving, at a family gathering, I was accused of begging for money in front of everyone. It wasn't true, and not a single person spoke up to deny it. I stayed silent and let it pass. Was that the wrong thing to do? What would you have done? The morning of Thanksgiving, I woke before my alarm went off. I counted the stains on the ceiling one by one. I didn't move my eyes for a while. Outside the window, I could hear the sound of distant cars passing at regular intervals. It took longer than usual to sit up. Today was a holiday. There was no reason to hurry. Still, my body held on to its weekday habits. My name is Taylor. I work in internal audit. My job isn't to correct a company's numbers into the right shape. I check whether the numbers submitted match the records behind them. Ledgers, receipts, contracts, system logs. I cross-reference them in order. I look for gaps or duplicates. It's not about believing someone's explanation. It's about picking up only what remains. If there's an anomaly, I look for the reason. If there isn't, I record that there isn't. There are rarely dramatic results. The reports are short. The numbers are cold. Still, when the procedures and evidence line up, you can explain things later. I work with numbers, but numbers have never saved me. It's just that when numbers remain, arguments stop. Even when someone tries to push through with a loud voice, if the records are there, they can't be overturned. I've seen that simple truth many times at work. That's why I developed the habit of checking dates and amounts before vague words. I don't know if that's right. I just see things in that order. My family is my parents and one sister. My sister is Vanessa. When she speaks, her subjects are big. We, everyone, normally, she says, and moves the conversation forward. Whether the listener agreed or not doesn't really matter. Momentum decides the room. People move to fit what's been decided. My sister's stories often avoid specific numbers. Instead, names, titles, and places line up. Still, people around her are satisfied. No one asks questions. I didn't think it was strange. I just learned to accept it as the way things were. My parents are used to her rhythm. Dad's voice is loud. He doesn't stop the flow of a conversation. When someone hesitates, he brings up the next topic first. Mom tidies things in her hands. She smooths over topics before they get sharp. She refolds napkins. She runs her finger along the edge of the table. She adjusts the position of glasses. When that motion begins, the conversation flows in a different direction. Relatives gather every year on the same holidays. Even if the number of people changes, the seating order stays mostly the same. The roles don't change either. My sister sits at the center. My parents support her. I'm introduced as the stable one. The introduction usually ends with my job description. She does auditing. She works with numbers. It's a solid job. No follow-up questions come after that. No one asks about my apartment or my recent life. Those topics never reach the table. I've never corrected them. It takes longer to choose the words to correct something. And in that time, the conversation flows somewhere else. Someone laughs. Someone else clinks a glass. The topic shifts. I sit there, unable to keep up with how fast it changes. Pointing out that I can't keep up would also stop the flow. I can imagine what would happen if I stopped it. So I don't. Within my family, I fit into a convenient explanation. The responsible one. The one who's good with numbers. The one who'll do it if you ask. In those descriptions, there are no deadlines, amounts, or conditions. Just the assumption that I can be asked. I've never denied that assumption. I haven't counted how many years have passed without denying it. I don't need to count. Every time the annual events repeat, it piles up in the same shape. Still, I go to that house every year. The reason isn't just one thing. When I put the reason into words, it sounds like an excuse. So instead, I bake a pie. I measure 1009, check the temperature, and time it. That way, I don't need to explain. If I bring it, a seat gets filled. At least I can maintain that form. Today, just like always, I head to my parents' house, knowing my role has already been decided, without thinking about what lies outside that role. I stand in the kitchen. The pumpkin pie I baked last night sits in the center of the counter. When I remove the plastic wrap, a faint sweet smell rises. I trace the edge of the plate with my finger. I check for tips. The option of buying something from a store was excluded from the start. No one asked me to bring anything. It's just that every time I imagined going to my parents' house empty-handed, the thought broke off halfway. I lift the pie with both hands. I shift it slightly, as if checking its weight. The heavy texture travels from my fingertips to my wrist. I measured all the ingredients. The temperature and timing were exactly as instructed. There were few ambiguous steps. I chose that unconsciously. Before getting in the car, I retied my shoelaces at the front door. I undid the knot once. Then I tied it again. There was no meaning to that motion. I just wanted to stretch the time a little. I closed the door, locked it, and pulled the key once more. I confirmed the sound. The road to my parents' house is one I've driven many times. At every red light, I measure the distance to the car in front of me. At an intersection where the red light felt long, I stayed still with my hands on the wheel. I had plenty of time to think of reasons to turn back, buy frozen food and go home, leave the TV on and spend the day on the sofa. I could picture that kind of day clearly. When I entered the residential area, that image cut off. I parked in front of my parents' house. I didn't turn off the engine right away. I stayed like that for a while. Through the windshield, I could see the glass of the front door. There was a shadow moving inside. It took a few seconds to realize it was Dad. He was looking this way. I turned off the engine and got out of the car. I adjusted my grip on the pie. I walked the short distance to the front door more slowly than usual. I stopped in front of the door. I had time to steady my breathing. "She's here." Dad's voice came from the other side of the door. I heard the lock turn. The door opened. His voice was loud and carried well. It hadn't changed since I was a child. When I stepped inside, the smell of sage and roast turkey filled the air all at once. In the distance, Mom's prized chandelier was glowing. People had already gathered beneath it. Laughter overlapped. The sound of glasses mixed in. I didn't count how many people there were, but it felt like a lot. Mom approached. She looked at what I was holding. "You brought dessert?" I held out the pie. Mom took it and gave me a light kiss on the cheek. The motion paused for just a moment, then ended. Her gaze shifted past me. Just that? Just me. And the pie. After I answered, there was a beat of silence. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. "Taylor works with numbers. Stable job. Always on time." I didn't move until his hand lifted. I understood it was meant as a compliment. It's just that those words had never been replaced with anything else. On the way to the living room, my uncle raised his glass. "The accountant has arrived." I answered without stopping. "Internal auditor." After I spoke, no one continued. A few seconds of silence followed. Then another conversation layered over it and erased mine. I accepted the champagne handed to me and waited for the bubbles to settle. Mom's phone rang. Her expression changed. "It's Vanessa. She's running a little late." 30 minutes, Mom said. No one reacted. I traced the rim of my glass with my finger, as if confirming that some people could be late without it being a problem. My sister arrived late, as promised. Her coat was one I'd seen in a magazine. So was her bag. She walked a few steps from the entryway and naturally settled into the center of the room. She talked about traffic while waiting for no one's response. Mom's voice was soft. "That's lovely." I emptied my glass. While the bubbles passed down my throat, I didn't raise my eyes. At the table, my sister's stories continued. A new project. Brand names. Overseas. No specific numbers came up. Only names lined up in a row. No one questioned her. My cousin leaned toward me a little. "Can I ask you about student loans?" I nodded and was about to speak. Before I could, Mom's voice came in. "Let's not talk numbers during the meal." After a beat, Mom continued. "Why don't you ask Vanessa?" My sister laughed. She swirled her glass lightly. "Taylor's all about numbers, and she's always broke anyway." The laughter was short, light, shaped like a joke. I held my fork without moving. I had time to wait for someone to deny it. "Stop begging for money. It's embarrassing." The words dropped. The sound disappeared from the table. Eyes gathered. Mom straightened her napkin. Dad reached for his glass. They were preparing to change the subject. No one corrected her. I said nothing. The silence continued. It wasn't long enough to count, but it definitely continued. Dessert was brought out. My pie had already been sliced. A plate was placed in front of me. It took a moment before I picked up my fork again. I couldn't taste it. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I knew it was a notification, but I didn't take it out. A different conversation began at the table. During that time, a short phrase floated through my mind. Numbers don't lie. I didn't understand what it meant yet, but that phrase alone remained clear. The next morning, I woke at the same time as always. The remnants of the holiday were already gone. The sounds of a weekday had returned outside the window. Light slipped through a gap in the curtains and drew a thin line on the floor. For a while, I watched to see where the end of that line would reach. Then I sat up. I went to the kitchen and filled the coffee maker with water. I set the filter and measured out the grounds. I leveled the measuring spoon once. Then I did it again. Just before pressing the switch, my hand paused for a moment. There was no reason. It was just as if I was confirming something. With the sound of coffee dripping behind me, I sat in a chair at the dining table. The laptop stayed closed. I picked up only my phone. I didn't turn on the screen. I traced the side of it with my finger. I still hadn't checked the notification that had buzzed in my pocket last night. I unlocked the screen. I opened the banking app. At the login screen, my finger paused. I entered my password. During the brief time before the next screen appeared, I didn't move my eyes. The list displayed. Account balance. Transaction history. Familiar numbers lined up. Among them, there were items that appeared on the same day every month. 5 of them. The names were all the same person's. I zoomed in on the screen and checked them one by one. Car insurance. Credit card. Personal loan. Another card. Another loan. The amounts varied each time, but when totaled, they came to roughly the same number, around $880 a month. I scrolled with my finger. Last month. The month before. Further back. Every time the displayed month changed, the same structure repeated. I stopped counting partway through. Instead, I jumped all the way to where the year changed. 5 years. I stopped scrolling and held the screen still. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled. I didn't try to confirm my emotions. I just looked at the numbers. I followed only the facts lined up there. The smell of coffee spread. I stood up and poured it into a mug. I returned to the table and opened the laptop. I created a new spreadsheet. In the cell where the cursor blinked, I typed a title. Payment history. Below that, I wrote a name. My sister's name. I checked for typos. Next, I created columns. Date, amount, purpose, P, notes. I entered them in order and adjusted the widths. I drew lines. I went back to the banking app and copied the first payment. I entered the date. I entered the amount. I wrote the purpose. Next row. Next row. The regular work continued. My fingers didn't stop. Partway through, I noticed the coffee had gone cold, but I didn't reheat it. As the input progressed, the sheet stretched downward. The scroll bar shortened. It took time to reach the payments from 5 years ago. I stopped my hands a few times, but I didn't take my eyes off the screen. Among them, there was one item that stood out. R. Roberts. The word "to" appeared before the name. I could tell it was a transfer. The purpose field was blank. The amounts were substantial and irregular. I saved that row and scrolled back through the screen. The same name appeared a few more times in the past. The frequency was low, but it was definitely there. It took a moment to realize it was a name that had come up in my sister's conversations. I didn't know the details. Was it a work relationship or a personal connection? I didn't think I needed to distinguish. When my sister explained things, that boundary was always vague. Still, in these records, she was the one sending money. I confirmed that fact alone, then continued entering data into the spreadsheet. I entered the last row and put a formula into the total cell. I pressed enter. A number appeared. 52,800. I looked at that number and didn't move on to the next action right away. I didn't close the screen or save it. I just left it as it was. I could hear the second hand ticking. I don't know how many seconds passed. I clicked save. I entered a file name and chose a save location. Vocal. Cloud. It didn't feel like one was enough, so I saved it in another location as well. I didn't move my eyes until the display showed that the save was complete. My phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. Unread notifications lined up. They were from my sister. I counted them. 16. I checked the time. They'd been coming since morning. I didn't read the contents. I muted the notifications. I placed the phone face down at the edge of the desk. I turned back to the laptop, looking down at the spreadsheet. I traced each row with my eyes. The numbers were aligned. There were no gaps. The calculations were correct, even after the check was finished. I didn't move on to the next action right away. Quiet time continued. The coffee had gone completely cold. I lifted the cup and took a small sip. Nothing happened. The screen and the room stayed the same. That phrase brushed through my mind again. Records remain, even when the voices shift. I didn't know the reason. I just knew that the numbers on the screen were aligned. The words that floated through my mind last night took shape here. I hadn't reached a conclusion yet. There were just facts lined up. That was all. My phone vibrated again. This time, Mom's name appeared, before the ringtone could sound. I took the time to stare at the screen. I didn't need to decide whether to answer. I just confirmed the fact that it was ringing. On the third ring, the call ended. I did nothing. Instead, I returned to the top of the spreadsheet. I reviewed the title. I adjusted the date format. I aligned the decimal places. I checked the digits. I adjusted the margins. After I finished, I closed the laptop. I stood up from the chair and walked to the window. Outside, people on their commute walked briskly. I didn't join that flow. I returned to the desk and picked up my phone. I turned on the screen. The notification count had increased. Sister, Mom, Dad. Names lined up. I turned off the screen. I hadn't decided anything. I just checked the numbers. That was all. Still, that morning's time was different from yesterday. Even afternoon passed. I didn't get up from my seat. The laptop stayed closed. On the desk, only my phone and the cold coffee cup remained. I traced the ring on the cup's rim with my finger. The mark didn't disappear right away. I turned on my phone screen. The unread notifications had increased. I checked the count, but didn't scroll. Before reading the contents, I just looked at the count first. That habit was the same at work. I grasped the volume, then moved forward. My sister's call history lined up. It wasn't at regular intervals. It came in short bursts, then paused, then overlapped again. The irregular pattern, which didn't seem intentional, stood out even more. I placed the phone face down at the edge of the desk. I stood up and went to the kitchen. I poured water into a glass. When I turned off the faucet, I didn't let go until the sound stopped completely. I carried the glass back and sat in the chair. Before drinking, I looked at my phone again. One more message from Mom had come in. It was a short sentence. I just checked it. I didn't mark it as read. Nothing had come from Dad yet. I rearranged that order in my head. I opened the banking app. It was the same screen I'd seen this morning. I displayed the payment list and tapped the relevant item. I waited without moving my finger until the next screen opened. Recurring payment. That's what it said. Settings options lined up. I scrolled to the bottom, then back. I read from the beginning again. The position of the text, the colors, the shape of the buttons. I repeated the checks to avoid mistakes. I selected the first payment, car insurance. I checked the amount and withdrawal date. My finger stopped. I stayed like that for a while without closing the screen. Even as time passed, the screen didn't change. Edit. I pressed the button. A confirmation screen appeared. I read the warning text. I read to the end. I checked the checkbox. I read the contents once more. Stop. I slowed down intentionally before releasing my finger. A confirmation message appeared. The screen changed. Recurring payment has been stopped. I didn't move on to the next item. I set the phone down on the desk once. I leaned back and looked at the ceiling. The same stains from this morning were there. I picked up the phone again. The second payment. Credit card. I opened the screen and followed the same steps. Read. Confirm. Scroll. Go back. Read again. Stop. The display changed. One more notification appeared. Third, fourth, fifth. The steps were the same, but the time I placed between them grew slightly longer each time. Partway through, I took a sip of water. It had no taste. I looked at the screen showing the fifth payment had been stopped. I didn't move. I didn't close the screen or lock it. I just kept looking at the displayed text. A notification sound rang. It was from my sister. A short message appeared at the top of the screen. Something's wrong. I swiped the notification down to dismiss it. Another notification appeared immediately. Payments aren't going through. The next one came without pause. Contact me right now. I left the phone on the desk without touching it. A vibration came through. It stopped. After a short gap, it vibrated again. I didn't count how many times. After a while, A call from Dad appeared. The ringtone sounded. It was set to cut off after 3 rings. I listened to all 3. After the call ended, the room was quiet. Only the outside sounds returned. I turned the phone over and opened the desk drawer. There was nothing special inside. I closed the drawer. This time, I opened the laptop. I displayed the spreadsheet I'd created this morning. I looked over the 5 items. The numbers hadn't changed. I checked the save time. Today's date was displayed. I saved it again. I closed the laptop and stood up from the chair. I stood in front of the window and looked outside. The flow of people was slightly less than in the morning. I could tell time was moving forward. Behind me, my phone vibrated again. I realized I hadn't muted the sound this time. I didn't turn around until the vibration stopped. I hadn't declared anything. I hadn't explained anything to anyone. I just changed a setting. That was all. Still, the air in the room was different from this morning. The next morning when I woke, my phone was already warm. Because I'd left it by my pillow while sleeping. The vibrations from notifications had continued many times. Before turning on the screen, I held it in my palm for a while and felt its weight. Once I turned it on, I could imagine what would be lined up there. I held my phone without turning on the screen right away. I pressed the edge with my fingertip and felt its weight. The vibrations had already stopped. I knew that if I turned on the screen, text would line up, but I felt I needed to decide the order myself. After waiting a few seconds, I finally unlocked it. The light coming through the curtain gap was stronger than yesterday. It was a weekday. I had work. I got out of bed and went to the bathroom. I put my toothbrush in my mouth and looked at myself in the mirror. There were no special changes. I tied up my hair, washed my face, and followed the same routine as always. The sound of turning off the water seemed unusually loud, even while making coffee in the kitchen. I didn't touch my phone. I set the filter, measured the grounds, and poured the water. I pressed the switch. While watching the steam rise, I tried not to count the vibrations that continued behind me. Finally, I sat at the table. I set down my mug and turned my phone face up. The notification count filled the screen. My sister's name continued. Between them, Mom, Dad, a familiar order. I tapped only the topmost notification. All the payments stopped. It was a short message. I opened the next one. What's going on? And the next. You're kidding. When I scrolled, the messages changed with each timestamp. Confusion, irritation, panic. The words increased. The punctuation increased. At the end, exclamation marks overlapped. Even after reading the messages, I didn't move to the next operation. My thumb stayed on the screen without moving. The reply field wasn't opened. The back button wasn't pressed. In that state, notifications piled up on the screen. I stopped reading partway through. I didn't need to grasp everything. I just checked the count and closed the screen. While preparing for work, the ringtone sounded. My sister's name. I didn't answer. I waited for the sound to stop. Immediately, it rang again. This time it was Mom. The ringtone ended and a notification arrived right away. Contact me right now. After reading that message, I didn't reply. I put my phone in my bag and closed the zipper. The closing sound was clear. On the way to the office, vibrations came through the bag many times, mixed with the train's movement. I couldn't tell which was a notification and which was the running sound. I didn't reach inside to check. I kept looking out the window. I looked only at my reflection in the window and the outline of buildings flowing past outside. The next station name appeared and disappeared. During that time, I never turned on the screen once. During work, I left my phone in my desk drawer. I processed morning tasks, reviewed documents, and checked numbers. The values on the screen maintained the same regularity as yesterday. I concentrated on following them. I checked from the top and put in check marks. There were no corrections. I pressed the approval button and moved to the next screen. During that work, the phone in the drawer was never taken out once. Just before lunch break, my supervisor stopped me. You've been very focused lately. I nodded briefly. There was no need to explain why. I didn't have words that could explain it. When I took out my phone in the break room, the notifications had increased even more. My sister's messages had lost all consistency. Blaming messages, pleading messages, messages bringing up the past, messages suggesting the future. I didn't read them one by one. I scrolled to the bottom and looked at the whole picture. Dad's call history remained once, from before noon. Mom's was 3 times. I checked each timestamp and closed the screen. In the afternoon, a coworker spoke to me. You said you gathered with family over the weekend, right? I nodded. Are you okay? That was the only question. I didn't answer. The conversation ended there. When it was time to leave, I exited the office. On my way to the lobby, I felt someone's gaze. Something moving entered the edge of my vision. It didn't come into focus right away. I stopped and looked again. It took a few seconds to recognize it as a person's shape. During that time, I didn't resume walking. When I turned around, I saw a familiar figure beyond the glass door. It was my sister. Her hair was neat. Her clothes were neat as always. I could tell she'd prepared to come here. When she spotted me, she approached immediately. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was controlled, but the distance was close. I felt the gazes of people around us gathering. I stopped and adjusted my grip on my bag. "This isn't the place to talk about this." When I said that, my sister stopped speaking for just a moment. What came out next was a different tone of voice. "I'm really in trouble. I need your help." I didn't answer. Silence continued. A security guard looked our way. My sister noticed the gaze and took a step back. "Contact me later." She said that and turned on her heel. I didn't follow her back. After I got home, my phone kept ringing. This time, it was the family group chat. My sister's message appeared on the screen. "Things have been really hard mentally lately. Sorry for worrying everyone." Replies from relatives followed. Concern, encouragement, words spoken without knowing the situation. After watching that flow to the end, I closed the app. Before long, a call came from Mom. I answered. "How did things come to this?" Mom's voice sounded like it was asking for an explanation, but had already decided on an answer. I didn't argue back. "Your sister is in trouble." I didn't respond. Silence continued. "We're family." When that phrase came out, I ended the call. The disconnection sound remained in the room. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the laptop. I displayed the spreadsheet. The numbers hadn't changed. The save time hadn't changed either. I checked the timestamp again and closed the display. I opened it again and looked at the same numbers. There was no change on the screen. After confirming that, I powered it down. I closed the screen and shut down the laptop. I left my phone face down. It took a while before the vibrations stopped. There was no sound of anything breaking. It's just that things that had been on the outside all turned toward me at once. From the next day on, the house didn't become quiet. There were sounds, notification tones, vibrations, ringtones that cut off quickly, but they no longer came at me as a single flow like before. They arrived in fragments, scattered. I didn't chase after them. I just confirmed that they were arriving. In the morning, when I opened the curtains, I saw the same street as always. The number of people walking, the flow of cars, the changing traffic lights. Nothing had changed. I stood there for a while and watched that movement before heading to the kitchen. I didn't change the routine of making coffee. I measured the water, added the grounds, and pressed the switch. While waiting, my phone sat face down at the edge of the table. Even when vibrations came through, I didn't turn it over. I went to work, processed tasks, and came home. Several days passed in the same shape. I didn't explain anything to anyone. Requests for explanation decreased as well. Instead, only short messages arrived. "Can we talk? It doesn't have to be now." I opened and closed them. I didn't write replies. I didn't care whether they were marked as read or not. Over the weekend, I sat at my desk and opened the laptop. I displayed the spreadsheet. 5 items. The total. The save time. There were no changes on the screen. I traced each row with my eyes and stopped scrolling. Even after the check finished, I didn't close it right away. After a while, I closed the laptop. The room was quiet. Only the sounds from outside could be heard. My phone rang. This time, it was an unknown number. I didn't answer right away. The ringtone stopped. A few minutes later, a message arrived. "This is Ryan." I stared at the screen and waited without moving my finger. I read it again. Then I pressed the call button. "Can you talk for a moment?" His voice continued at an even pitch. I didn't rush to respond. "I'm listening." The name Ryan sounded familiar. It was a name that had come up a few times in my sister's conversations. Not frequently, but when certain topics came up, it always appeared. And it was also the name that had remained in that spreadsheet. I didn't know in detail what kind of relationship my sister and Ryan had. Was it a work relationship or a personal connection? I didn't think I needed to distinguish. When my sister explained things, that boundary was always vague. Contract talks, payment discussions, times when something needed to be sorted out. My sister often inserted that name in the middle of explanations. "Ryan's handling it now. It's faster to go through Ryan once." She'd say that and cut the conversation short. I'd never asked about that name in detail. Maybe I'd tried to ask, but conversations always moved forward. They never went back. I'd never met him directly. I'd never heard his voice before. But in my sister's life, in situations involving numbers or procedures, that name always remained. When my sister simplified her explanations, that name was used conveniently, as words to omit details, as words to make the location of responsibility vague. I only remembered how it was used. His way of speaking assumed procedures. There were no emotional explanations. Only numbers and sequences were presented. My sister's name came up, but no evaluation was added. I confirmed that distance before continuing the call. He explained what my sister had been hiding: payments, borrowing, numbers. Much of it overlapped with what I already knew. I didn't offer any responses. I waited until the conversation broke off. "You've been helping her for a long time." I didn't react to those words right away. Just the facts. When I answered that, he paused briefly. "From now on, I'll manage it." I didn't know whether those words were a promise or a declaration. I didn't confirm. He didn't explain in detail either. Only the fact that the role had shifted remained. After the call ended, I stayed still for a while, holding my phone. I waited until the screen went dark. Then I set it on the desk. A few days later, a new message appeared in the family group chat. "We'll handle it." It was a short message. There was no specific explanation. I read it and closed it. Calls from Mom decreased in frequency. Even when they came, they didn't last long. "Are you doing okay?" I answered briefly, neither affirming nor denying. Dad started sending only messages. "Let's talk again sometime." I didn't save that message. I didn't delete it either. A week later, a notification arrived from the bank. A deposit. The amount wasn't large. I looked at the sender's name. It was my sister. I didn't close the screen right away. I checked the amount and looked at the date. I opened the reply field and closed it. No text was entered. Received. I sent just that and placed the phone face down. That night, I turned off the room lights and sat on the sofa. I put a blanket on my lap and didn't move. Outside, I could hear the sound of a TV from someone's apartment. I heard it as a distant sound. I didn't feel like I'd taken anything back. I didn't think I'd lost anything either. It just felt like the space was wider than before. The next month, on the same day, a similar notification arrived. The amount was the same. I checked it and closed it. I didn't think of that action as anything special. As time passed, contact decreased even more. It didn't disappear completely, but the time I didn't respond grew longer, and more things just faded away on their own. One night, I sat at my desk and opened a notebook. I looked at the blank page for a while and set down my pen. I left the choice not to write as it was. I hadn't cut anyone off. I couldn't say I'd repaired the relationship either. I just didn't return to the same place as before. It wasn't a clear enough line to call it drawing a boundary. A distance I didn't approach. Topics I didn't touch. Words I didn't return. Those things piled up little by little. The numbers didn't change. The payment settings didn't change. My life didn't change much either. Still, when I closed my eyes at night, there were fewer things to confirm. The time I didn't spend confirming increased. My phone sat face down at the edge of the table. I could tell a vibration had come through, but I didn't turn it over. If I turned on the screen, I could imagine that names would line up again, that messages would continue. Still, I didn't move beyond that imagination. Instead, I looked at the kitchen clock. I waited for the second hand to complete one rotation, then another. During that time, nothing happened. The time spent confirming that nothing happened continued. I poured the coffee remaining at the bottom of the cup into the sink. I watched to the end as the color thinned with water. Even after the sound of turning off the faucet stopped, my hand didn't let go right away. I returned to the desk and opened the blank notebook. In front of the white page, I waited without picking up the pen. The state of not writing continued for several minutes. I didn't interrupt it. I didn't know whether the time passing without responding was intentional or just blank space. I just didn't feel like I'd lost anything during it. I opened the desk drawer. Inside, the backup of the spreadsheet I'd created that morning remained quietly saved. But records remain. Was distance what I chose? Was I wrong to stay silent and let it pass in that moment? Even now, I don't know clearly. But there's one thing for certain. It remains here.